I had a bit of a viral moment this past week. Not sure if you caught my H1-B visa post, but it garnered some considerable attention with over 250,000 impressions, 1,000 reactions, 40 reposts. Not bad, not bad. But it was kind of the talk of the town this week around the H1-B visa fiasco. Trump announced a surprise $100,000 US one-time fee on a new H1-B visa applications, sparking chaos in the US and critics saying this undercuts startups while big firms shrug it off as essentially pocket change. But I don't know if that's the case because the H-1B visa is a non-immigrant classification. It allows U.S. employees to basically temporarily hire foreign workers in specialty occupations requiring the theoretical and practical application of highly specialized knowledge.
I agreed with your post in saying, is this not now an opportunity to use that advantage? But let's chase the most valuable folks on skill sets that we just don't have here that we really require.
Hey everyone, before we dive into today's Tank Talk, a quick word from our sponsor, Fasken. If you're an early stage founder navigating the legal side of startups, chances are you'll need someone like Will Shaw in your corner. Will is a partner at Fasken, and he is here to help us break down some of the common startup legal questions we get all the time. Will, thanks for joining us in the Tank today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
You know, Will, a lot of early stage founders that we deal with at Ripple, and obviously you deal with on a daily basis, are debating so many different things when it comes to working with investors and partners. The first thing we always ask is, should I raise a safe note or go after a priced round? So first off, what's your perspective on this, and what are the key differences a lot of founders should know about the two?
Yeah, safes are definitely faster, but they kick the conversation down the road on a few important things. Like, for example, a safe will defer setting a valuation, which makes things simple up front, but it can lead to unexpected dilution down the road if you're not managing your cap table. A price round is setting the valuation now, so everybody knows what they're going to own in the company, but it's also giving away a little bit more in the sense of rights. So a founder really needs to watch how much their dilution they're taking on and also think about what rights they're giving away and what the timing is for crystallizing all of those things.
Right. And there's a lot of these in-between things that people also try to jam into safe notes because they are a little bit faster, but they want a little bit more protection,
Yep.
which we call side letters. So we hear about them a lot, Will, especially in more competitive rounds. You know, what are some of the factors that founders should think about and look out for when an investor asks for a side letter?
Side letters can be useful, especially when the safe is a standard form. And exactly to your point, Matt, you're trying to get other rights in there. So they can give specific rights to special investors like pro rata rights or extra information or board observer seats that aren't in the main deal. But founders should make sure they're not creating long-term risks or burden or giving one investor an unfair advantage that might scare off future investors.
Yeah, I know. We definitely obviously like having side letters as well, being an institutional investor where safe notes may be a faster path, but there are certain things that investors need to have in protection when they're not doing a price round. You know, we have worked together on many transactions with you and your team, Will. You guys have been fantastic partners of ours, but a lot of things that happen at the beginning of a company's journey kind of end up biting them in the butt on the other side when they either exit or sell the company. Many think about acqui-hires or M&A transactions, and we all face it. Not every company is going to go public. They often get acquired early and go through these acqui-hire scenarios. What are some of the things that founders should think about from a legal standpoint, you know, if they're going forward with an acqui-hire or some type of M&A transaction?
Just start early. Keep track of your documents as you're going through things. Make sure they're in a data room. Make sure your IP is properly assigned. You make sure your contracts are clean. There are a lot of things that are simple to do at the time, but are really difficult to fix later on. And an acquirer is going to dig into everything, especially IP, the team agreements. If those aren't buttoned up, you're going to lose a lot of leverage and you may end up killing the deal.
Yeah, these are awesome insights, Will. Thank you so much to you and the Fasken team for supporting Tank Talks. All right, now let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the Tank, John. How are you doing?
Great, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. Just coming off the heels of your Mavericks Private Equity Summit. What an amazing event that was. Thank you very much for the invite as well. What were some of the biggest highlights that you took away from that summit? It's always one of my favorites every year. You have such great thought leaderships. I question everything about myself after leaving that day. But what were some of the biggest things that you took away from this year's Maverick Summit?
Sure. Well, I'll reflect on the feedback from the attendees. And I think three I say big sovereignty, and the concept of what sovereignty really means was a consistent theme throughout every single one of the sessions. And I think Canadians now are realizing what we need to do from an industrial policy perspective to ensure that we pave our future without undue influence. And so that was number one. Number two, Admiral Stavridis, I think, blew away the crowd. And, he basically summarized all of the turmoil in each region of the world, gave his views on probability just based on his insights that he has. But the thing that I was most impressed about, now that he's a vice chair of Carlyle, he then converted each of the geopolitical into an investment opportunity. And this is, what I've been telling everyone. Politics is business. And boy, did he ever, illustrate that. And the third thing, and I would say was the most controversial, was really where we are in the state of AI. And, we had a very animated panel there, but I would say to you, I think people are just not taking the assumption that AI is the panacea of every one of the world's problems. And maybe that economic value equation is very unclear today, but perhaps in the medium to long term, it'll become much more clear.
And obviously the biggest one that shook me to my core was the Ed Zitron, Ken Nickerson conversation. Ed is a pretty big, vocal, doom and gloom kind of AI thought leader. But it was a great talk, and it shed light on, obviously, some of the news that we're seeing today transfold into the public markets. Your own Peter Shih on September 23rd, he was stirring the pot on what he calls one of the strangest financial loops in tech. He talks about the potential vendor financing scheme reminiscent of the dot-com bubble's excess with Nortel and Cisco. Basically, for our listeners who may not be understanding about this vendor financing thing going on, there was an announcement that NVIDIA's letter of intent to invest $100 billion into OpenAI, starting with the first gigawatt of compute in H2 2026. OpenAI's $300 billion 5-year compute deal with Oracle, not starting until 2027, and then Oracle's $40 billion commitment to buy NVIDIA chips tied to powering OpenAI's data centers like the new Texas facility. So this loop of vendor financing into each other's own business units and then back around again is very reminiscent, but at a much more significant scale than what we saw with Nortel. And I think that's the point here, John. Can you give our listeners a sense of what was going on in those Nortel days that you remember and how this is similar but a lot more significant?
Yes. So in the Nortel days, what Nortel was doing was selling its telecommunications equipment, mostly on the fiber optic equipment and the photonics, which they were known for a lot of these startups. And then they would lend the money to the startups for the pay Nortel. And so Nortel had on its books a massive investment in loans in these startups. And then what ended up happening when they realized that these startups had no financial capacity and they were worthless, they went back and they readjusted the sales of Nortel and moved them down. I can't remember the numbers anymore, but from about $30 billion to some number that I thought was just south of $10 billion. So it was $20 billion of, I'd say, economically inappropriate sales. And the question here today is, and again, I haven't done the full math, but if you take the big 7 folks who are heavily involved in the AI sector, and it includes NVIDIA is the only profitable one. And the other 6, when you take their AI business, is massively in the hole. and again, you know, factoring in CapEx as well. If you were to do a consolidated income statement on all 7, it's a loss, not
Right.
profit. That's the question. So is anybody really economically making money on AI? And that was the fundamental question of the circular nature that Peter was sort of describing. It's not being conclusive, but what it is doing is causing people to start to test some implicit assumptions that were never really tested, but were just espoused as truth.
Right. And Peter points out the hype factor, right? Non-binding LOIs, delayed timelines, and Oracle touting this massive backlog, you know, the 317 billion in undelivered revenues.
Yeah. With no energy supply to back them up. Like, frankly, they were impossible to deliver, yet the market didn't challenge it.
Well, the stock is coming off pretty much from those highs and now coming back a bit down. But let's double click on some of this because it is quite important to think about this. So NVIDIA, $4.5 trillion or so company, 83% of its revenues are from 6 companies. Okay, that's tons of concentration. Now, they are also the biggest companies in the world that are not slowing down in this race and spending a lot of money.
Right.
But like you're saying, is heavily skewed to those, you know, willingness buyers of their products. But Euclid Ventures put out an interesting post today, September 25th, titled Deuce X CapEx, which digs into the exploding AI CapEx bubble and was built on top of the Sequoia's David Kahn's report in 2023 on the $200 billion AI problem, which is now a $600 billion shortfall, potentially hitting a $1 trillion by 2026 in required lifetime revenue to pay back the GPU, data center, and energy investments. So just for our listeners to understand, David Kahn from Sequoia had the math that was for every dollar invested in GPUs, adds $1 in energy, and then double for 50% margins, leading to hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta forecasting $364 billion in 2025 CapEx. That's nearly 50% of their revenue. Okay? So this is an important thing to understand. Now, these data center spends could hit $3 trillion by 2030. Again, $3 trillion by 2030. Okay, with AI contributing more to the US GDP than consumer spending this year alone. But this is all being fueled by private credit, CMBSs and things like that, different types of financing mechanisms, very similar to what we saw maybe in the global financial crisis. But it's the cost to actually make this money back is where the shortfall is needed. Revenue is lagging. Let's just say in a generous year, they can do 90 billion in new AI revenue, consolidated, like you said, John. That's still 870 billion short that is needed. And with debt holders funding this, it's going to be really hard to make up the difference on this return on investment is the question.
Yeah. And Matt, again, the evidence of my lack of hair supports it. I was one of the key advisors in Canada on this whole thing in the late 1990s. Not only was I an advisor to Nortel, but to these, they're called CLECs, or they were local exchange carriers. And they were basically startups that were becoming mini telecoms everywhere. And it imploded because what happened was they overbuilt the infrastructure by a massive amount. And the concept of dark fiber came out.
Yep.
Question really is, and again, this is not a conclusion, but running the math, are we building overcapacity in from the data center perspective? And again, not to discount it, but people just automatically assume that the demand would be there. And also, you got to factor in the efficiencies from a technological perspective on decreasing the amount of energy usage, et cetera, which might create also more pressure on excess demand. So that was really the fundamental question that came out in those discussions.
Yeah, so with AI CapEx potentially hitting, as I said, $3 trillion by 2030 and revenue shortfalls in the trillions, this circular financing motion could be in trouble if demand softens, right?
Correct.
And then there was this Financial Times piece that offered a bit of a sobering look at how, the US's biggest companies are still grappling with AI. The piece was divided into the hundreds of S&P filings and earnings transcripts from last year, revealing that while AI mentions are skyrocketing, mostly from FOMO strategy, the companies are still finding ways to bake it into their actual products and their profit margins. And that's where I think a lot of the things that our people are investing in now on the infrastructure side are not seeing the returns on the positive side just yet. We talked about the MIT report as well. There are some bright spots though, and people are still trying to figure this out because it does take time to show value in the ROI. But what do you think, John, here? Like, do you think the demand will soften, or do you think it will just take time to really hit an inflection point for people to see the value in traditional American businesses, not the scalers, in terms of the value they're getting from the use of all these tools?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I can't predict what's going to happen, but do I think that numbers are difficult to accept in terms of the demand? Short answer is yes. I think that there is a short-term bubble that's clearly emerging. But in my optimistic side, do I think in the medium to longer term, does the of excess supply then absorb? My answer is yes, it does. But right now, I do think that people are getting carried away with the level of infrastructure that might be required.
Yeah, and people say overestimate in the short term, underestimate in the long term, right? And so timing that is going to be very hard. But you and I talked about this other comment about Bhaskar and Guwaran, who basically said that sell everything. The market looks dire and job displacement is on the horizon. He basically went into saying, I've liquidated my entire portfolio, you know, because there is potentially an AI bubble with broken economics, sky high valuations, and a lot of people just ignoring fundamentals. And then you had, 20 VC Harry Stebbings tweeting, I've been investing for 10 years. I've never seen markets as frothy as this. 200x revenue valuations are back, less diligence than ever, less focus on business fundamentals than ever. Let's see how this all plays out. But you also have Anthropic, who had money being thrown at them at their last round. They could have taken twice as much, but it was actually quite fairly valued. If you think about it, at only 20 times revenue at that scale, when they were below $1 billion last year and approaching 9 to 10 billion this year. So what do you make of this in terms of where there is opportunity and also heartburn?
Well, so number one, when you sent me that article, I had a bit of a heart attack. I have a relatively defensive 60-40 strategy personally, and I went back to my advisor saying, can you stress test for me? Because the stat that bothered me was the average revenue multiple on the S&P. What was the number again? It was some
30s?
No, revenue multiple, the average of the entire.
Oh, the average.
Yeah.
Oh, the whole average of the S&P.
Yeah, it was a crazy high number. It was like 7 times, or it is by far, I can't remember you had in the, but it was by far the highest going past before the .com bust. So, let's now talk about your Anthropic. So you just said, hey, wait a minute. At 20 times revenue, that's very pricey still, but not as egregious. However, when you adjust it for is it really a 20 times revenue model? If you look at the gross margin, when it's, technology comparisons is anywhere from a 70 to 90% gross margin, and Anthropic, their long-term hope is to be at 50%.
Agreed.
Then even that 20 times is so overinflated already. So going to the article that you had said, I couldn't help to have anxiety that we are at peaks. And, the only question is, do you readjust your portfolio? This article here suggested a 100% movement to cash. Sounded extreme, but they also have Warren Buffett, who's got more cash than God these days, and he's warehousing it as well. So there is anxiety in this market, and I am concerned on how it's going to play out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's switch gears here, John. A bit of a viral moment this past week. Not sure if you caught my H1-B visa post, but it garnered some considerable attention with over 250,000 impressions, 1,000 reactions, 40 reposts. Not bad, not bad. But it was kind of the talk of the town this week around the H1-B visa fiasco. So for our listeners who may have no clue what we're talking about, Trump announced a surprise $100,000 US one-time fee on a new H1-B visa applications, sparking chaos in the US and critics saying this undercuts startups while big firms shrug it off as essentially pocket change. But I don't know if that's the case because the H1-B visa is a non-immigrant classification. It allows U.S. employees to basically temporarily hire foreign workers in specialty occupations requiring the theoretical and practical application of highly specialized knowledge. Yeah, right. People take advantage of that one for sure.
Yes.
This is in fields like technology, engineering, or science. It can also apply to roles in, the Department of Defense and things like that. But, even fashion models can even get this one. So it was definitely being taken advantage of.
It was.
I think that's why the Trump administration decided to look at this one specifically. But in order to qualify, you also had like a U.S. bachelor's degree or higher, which most people have. And then you had to make these filings with like the labor condition application, but it was a lottery system, right? And so you had this 3 years initial term, then an extendable to 6 and possibly even further if you're basically going for green cards, right? If you had an application in. So what is happening now is basically you need to file $100,000 fee for new H1B petitions filed after September 21st of this year, but this does not apply to renewals or existing visas.
Yep.
And a lot of people in Canada, including myself, looked at this as an opportunity, but your good friend Ben Bergen said this actually could become a plant economy for Canada if we have this in place. So what are your thoughts on this? Because there was a lot of comments around how it's already, not really an advantage to us because as the data shows from Leaders Fund, Gideon Hayden, there was 3,000 venture-backed startups show only 32% of high potential ones raising over $1 million are HQ'd still in Canada now, down from 67% pre-2020. So a lot of you have already left Canada. The brain drain is already gone. Is this going to help bring them back? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think it does that. And I read all the pros and the cons and the justifications on, from the U.S. side and a lot of the commentary in Canada. And again, hard to predict, if Canada could leverage this as an opportunity. But let me tell you what two people who I know had said, both happened to be in India, and both said that it's not so much this change in the tightening up because there was abuse, but it's further giving them anxiety that the U.S. is taking a very negative view on immigration. And as the world's becoming a much more dangerous and frankly racist place, Canada is still viewed as, a bastion of welcomeness from an immigration perspective. And what Canada did wrong over the last 5 years in particular, what was a decent, flawed, but decent immigration policy, and we opened it up so wide open, so uncontrolled, and we should go back to a system of smart immigration. And all I can say to you is, comment that I got back is, they have increasing anxiety on the hostility in the United States, but they also do appreciate, the great market that it has there. So maybe they would rather immigrate over to Canada and then fly back and forth to the United States as it's required. So I agreed with your post in saying, is this not now an opportunity to use that advantage? But let's chase the most valuable folks on skill sets that we just don't have here that we really require.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is like the rhetoric around the Trump administration's views on immigration is pretty hostile. What I would say to that is they feel like they've been taken advantage of.
Yes.
And they need to set a precedent. So what do? You come out with the most attention grabbing headline you can to shock people into paying attention to the subject matter. Then you walk it back into terms that are relatively digestible, but still not allowing you to be taken advantage of. And then you go forward on that plan. So the bark is stronger than the bite. Okay. And I think that you need to have that same policy here in Canada because no, disrespect to how, Canada has viewed immigration, but we also have people taking advantage of the systems as well. But sure. We're not going to come out and say that we have $100,000, plan in place for people to apply. So I think that where this final thing lands will probably be the right spot for the US because of how much advantage they have been taken of from this program. And we all know it in the tech industry. But from a Canadian perspective, this could be a huge win for hubs like Toronto and Vancouver, where people are going to say, okay, I will set up my second office from overseas in Canada, closest, 1 hour flight to New York on the East Coast and an hour to SF on the West Coast, and not have to deal with all the visa stuff. And that could be a win for us as well.
Now, Matt, just for one point of clarification, when I'm talking about the opportunity for Canada, I am talking about it as it relates to based businesses.
Understood.
And accessing the talent. What Ben is referring to is we don't want,
American companies to set up satellite offices here.
Yeah. And the biggest user I thought of H1-B was Tata Consulting. But
let me ask you, why doesn't Ben want people to have Uber's second office in Toronto and spin up great talent there, or Amazon's second office in Vancouver? Why?
Yeah, well, because what it's been doing is having the effect of sucking in more of the Canadian-based talent. And what happens, it puts a knee down for many of the startups, the Canadian-based startups that are trying to compete against the talent. That's been an issue. It's been an issue for a while.
It's a really good training ground, though. Let's be fair.
It is.
If someone's graduating school and they want to go work,
it's a good training ground. But let's just say it's an AI. There's no shortage of AI opportunities in Canadian-based businesses. But one of the challenges were if an American-based company were to come in here, and
if OpenAI wants to open up an office in Toronto and train the best minds coming out of U of T and Waterloo, and people want to do a stint there for a couple of years and then become founders, I think that's great. I think that's great for Canada.
That is great. But let's say that they don't leave and they just want to have a career there and then use this and Microsoft was very vocal about this. It was a way to hoover up employees and to move to the head office.
It's a free market, though, right? The free market. They get to pay whatever you want. So this pays taxes in Canada, puts food on the table for families.
Yeah.
It's not the worst thing. I understand as a startup investor, it could be tough to swallow that, fighting a Microsoft benefits package.
Yeah.
For sure.
But
that's the market.
Right. Absolutely. But do you want to pay your tax bills to support their training in our universities? Just so that their ultimate fruits of their labor passes on to a foreign-based multinational.
So if they worked at RBC, would that be better?
It would be better. It's not it still doesn't help the startups, but I'm talking Canadian-based businesses. Yes, it would be better. This is the issue: is don't focus in on the jobs per se, because you're using the analogy of the jobs. I'm using the focus on where is the value capture. And
fair enough. The IP value.
We haven't focused in on value. So I am totally focused in on
if that's what the focus is, and I agree with you. If IP is you're created in Canada but sucked up and owned by an American company, that's tough.
That's
something I think what Ben is trying to say.
This is our 3 decades of branch plant economy, and look at where it's gotten us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, last thing I want to mention, we've got some breaking news here. Someone who you know well and has been a big leader in the Canadian tech scene for, 25 years. Constellation Software's founder is stepping down amid some health concerns and resigning immediately. Mark Leonard, who is the founder and president of Constellation Software, has been, obviously something has happened, resigning immediately for unspecified health reasons, staying on as board director with COO Mark Miller stepping in as president. This is breaking news here on Thursday, September 25th, John. What are your thoughts? Constellation Software also hosted a AI conversation call mid-quarter, unannounced sort of, which was interesting. People have been questioning Constellation's sort of rise over the last 25 years. But now in the age of AI, is legacy software, hitting some headwinds, basically.
Yeah. No, I was stunned by the news. Now, Mark has been talking, at least for the last 5 years with me, that he was getting into the senior statesman role and passing on the organization to the folks around him. Mark Miller, who's taken over right now, has been with him from day one, is extremely capable leader. But, Mark and I do go back to about 1997. I first met him when he had 8 employees And he explained to me the strategy of what he was trying to build. But I've never seen anyone so precise in terms of how they were going to build it. What was the model? What was the financial model? I would say that in my entire career, he was the most strategic ever experienced. Like he's just the master, and he's very professorial on how he communicates his mathematical view. And he ended up being right. And in fact, I knew to be right. I just never imagined how well he was going to do and how big. And neither did he, by the way. The other unusual thing about Mark is he is humble to a fault, to the point that, you would rarely ever see a photo of him anywhere on the internet. He doesn't do interviews, etc. And he is one of the kindest, gentlest souls with the mind that's sharp as a tack. So I hope this is not overly serious. It did concern me when I saw him, but truly one of the great legends, certainly throughout my entire working career.
Yeah, absolutely. We all hope that Mark is hopefully able to pull through whatever health concerns he is facing for him and his family. This company was founded in 1995 with $25 million from OMERS.
Yeah.
Not OMERS Ventures, OMERS.
It was OMERS, yeah.
It was
OMERS
just
private
OMERS.
equity.
Private equity and Ventures West. And it became a TSX powerhouse, right? It was doing deals in the market in COVID heyday of 0.8 times sales when the peers were doing 15 times sales. This kind of hits close to home for a lot of Canadian VCs who've been around for a while. It's a rare success story for enterprise software investors. And so hopefully this is just a bit of a health blip, and the AI headwinds that are facing Constellation stock, down 15% or so year to date versus its peers up 20. Just something that allows them to kind of move through and come out the other side stronger. So as always, John, thanks for joining us in the tank today.
Great. Thanks, Pat.